Karin Hurt, and I'm here with our next live edition of Asking for a Friend. And this one is very special to me because this is a reunion of sorts of some fellow keynote speakers who I met at the Bermuda Human Resource Association conference really almost 2 years ago today. And, you know, they say Dolly Parton says you can't make old friends. But in both of these cases, I do feel like I've made old friends. So first, let me invite Lee Rubin to join us. And Lee, I remember when I met you that evening. So I am really not technically savvy. And so I walk into this big conference facility, right? And our meeting planner was struggling to get this whole backdrop, built. And of course, you want to be helpful. So I'm there and I'm trying to help her and it is not working. And Lee walks in and he's like, hey, I think you're one of the other speakers. And he just went, boop, 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 and everything was fine. We had been there for like a half an hour. So Lee, it's been fun to stay connected over the years. And Laura, I'd love to have Laura Cole join. And it was very fun. Laura, once we met, I swear to you, for 3 days, we could not stop talking. Oh, you want to go to breakfast? You want to go to lunch? You want to go to dinner? And then we had so much in common that we ended up making a girls' weekend to go to Niagara Falls because we just couldn't stop talking about all the things that we had in common. So we are just absolutely delighted to have you both on. Both Lee and Laura are what I would say are real experts in trust and collaboration. And so that is why we've picked this particular topic now. So thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, for sure.
So I am really curious when you think about the last couple of weeks, months, what has been a source of strength for you? Anything? What is really, what have you called on as a source of strength?
Well, again, thanks for having me, Karin. The thing that comes to mind, the thing that works for me is, in my mind, adversity equals opportunity. And while everything is uncertain and there's a lot of upheaval, it's during those times that I look for opportunities. So I am looking for opportunities to strengthen my relationships, to get better, to become more innovative, to add additional value to my clients and really reach out to them to make sure that they're okay, because I just know that when this is over, and at some point it will be over, they're going to remember where those relationships were strong and where they weren't.
Beautiful. Thank you. Laura, how about you?
Yeah, I've been doing a lot of mediations over the last 5 or 6 months with just a lot of teams with tension and just a bit of stress with their experiences. And what I've discovered and what I've kind of made as my mantra for right now is behind every complaint, there is a hope. And if we believe that that's true, what difference can that make for us in our day? And that's what I'm holding on to every day.
Oh, behind every complaint, there is a hope.
Yes.
I love that so much, particularly now. We're hearing, at least Laura's in Canada, and I may go soon, but there is so much complaining going on right now. And so what is the hope behind that complaint? I love it. So let's start by talking a little bit about trust. How do you build trust, particularly in remote teams? Because it does seem like you have to be a little bit more deliberate when everyone is remote. So we've got two things going on. We're remote, many of us, or we're under so much stress because you're not remote and you're a first responder or something that, you have to be and you're scared too. Or in addition to that, there's all this other anxiety that's going on, which could be very hard and you make people feel distrustful. So let's start with trust. Lee, I'd like to send it over to you first and get your thoughts.
Yeah, I think you nailed it with the word you just said. It's got to be deliberate. Trust is about the connection between people. Again, back to the whole idea of relationships. And it's got to be deliberately built. I think because we've been remote, we've taken a lot for granted. when I can see you, when I can touch you, when we interact on a daily basis, there's certain things that we just simply take for granted, and we don't value it until it's gone, right? Just like, anything else, you never miss it until it's gone. Mm-hmm. And I think we've been forced to be really deliberate about how we communicate, about the nature of our communication, about the frequency of our communication, because I think that's where the biggest breakdown occurs. It's in how frequently, and it's both the quantity and the quality of our communication.
Very good. Very good. Laura, how about you? Trust.
Yeah, and actually, if I can build on what Lee just said about the quality of communication, and I couldn't agree more that we know that a critical element in building trust is the opportunity to have quality dialogue where we can express both positive and negative emotions without this feeling of being judged while we do it. And so without, an intentional, deliberate structure, if I can borrow those words as well, to support that type of quality dialogue, those efforts often fall short and feel a bit flat. And so they don't actually help us with that trust building. And especially when we're dealing with technology and this type of barrier that we didn't used to have as much in our life, that deliberate structure can be so helpful in having those quality dialogues.
Oh, that's great. Laura, I know you are an expert in providing structure and the work that you've been doing in group mediation. And I know we were chatting the other day about a really interesting model that you have. So I'd love for you to tell us a little bit about that process.
Yeah, I'd love to. So Hae-Sun Moon of the Canadian Centre for Brief Coaching, she identified that our dialogues actually exist on two continuums. We speak in the past tense and the future tense. And here you can see the quadrants here. So we speak in the past tense and the future tense, and we express both positive and negative emotions. And when we take those two continuums and lie them over top of each other, Hae-Sun discovered this grid that creates these quadrants where we can literally map our conversations. So quadrant 1, that's where we're talking in the future about positive things, and we call that preferred future. Quadrant 2 is when we're talking about positive things from our past, and we refer to that as resourceful past. And then we come below the line there and we see quadrant 3 is our negative past, and quadrant 4 is our negative future. And so what Hae-Sun discovered was that all of our conversations and all of our dialogue exist within these quadrants. And if we go back to understanding that in order to build quality trust, we need these opportunities to have conversation and express both positive and negative experiences without judgment. Now we discover we can actually use this grid to map our conversations, and we can literally measure where our conversations are taking place. And then it provides opportunity where we can say, oh, if we're able to venture into this other quadrant, we might be able to find opportunities there for collaboration and for trust building.
Oh, wow. That is really, really interesting. So in your mediations, are you the mapper?
Yes. Yes. And so most of us don't even realize we're using this grid, right? This is so subconscious. We don't know that we're speaking in this grid. And what I've discovered in mediation, especially in group mediations, is that sometimes the mistrust and the miscommunication or the conflict is existing because we're speaking from different quadrants and we don't even realize that. And we all have a default quadrant that we're very comfortable speaking from. And we may not realize that until we map it out that, wow, I've spent most of my time in quadrant 3. If I'm going to be looking for collaboration and attempting to build trust, what can I do about visiting some of these other quadrants? And then that's where I come in, helping map that and then helping encourage that visiting in the different quadrants.
Oh, very, very nice. So it looks like Meredith has also joined us, Jared. So Meredith McCreadie, she was also at the Bermuda Human Resource Association, and was one of the masterminds of getting that whole wonderful conference together. And so I'd love to bring her on to gather some of her insights as well.
Hi guys, can you hear me?
We can hear you, but we cannot see you.
I'm so sorry. My camera it said access to my camera when I joined, but it doesn't seem to want me to allow me to do it. Well, I'll see if I can fiddle around here and get it to work. But yes, very happy to join the conversation today. It's so great to see everybody again. Can you believe that was over 2 years ago now?
Yeah, I know. And you know what? One of the things to think about while you're working on your camera is at your cocktail party, you had named all these crazy cocktails for things that were going on for human resource professionals. And I wonder what you would call the quarantine cocktail, if you guys have come up with a good name for that.
Oh my goodness, what would we call the quarantine? Not 2020, or not 2020 vision, or something along those lines, maybe. We actually had to cancel our conference this year. I think they're pushing it till next year as well. So, but yeah, those were fun names on the drinks for sure.
So Lee, I'm all about the really practical tools. And so I've really been wondering, what are you finding are either a tool or a technique or a process that you have used with some of your clients that seems to be really working well to foster trust and collaboration?
Sure. Well, let me frame it using Laura's chart that she just shared. I am fascinated by that chart. So again, I think the issue is always miscommunication. The problem is rarely the problem. It's usually communication about the problem. And what most leaders do is they are speaking from a visionary perspective, that preferred future, while their team members are sort of stuck in the negative present or the negative past. And so there's this disconnect. What the best leaders are doing are making sure that their relationship building is more than transactional. Our conversations are not just about business. They are actually scheduling time to have personal conversations or non-work conversations with their teammates to make sure that they're okay. The conversations are empathetic, they're compassionate, they are reinforcing the fact that as a leader, I am genuinely concerned about how you're doing during this crazy time where there's so much uncertainty, fear, just a lot of craziness. So they understand that the relationship is more than transactional, and they're making time, not hoping it happens, to address their team members on a very personal level.
Ah, very, very good. Meredith, I know at KPMG, you've been doing some things specifically to foster collaboration. What are some of the best practices that are going on there?
Yes. So fortunately for us, when we just before we went into the whole lockdown and the remote working from home, we have implemented the MS Teams as a platform that we were going to start using, which was, I think, very much a saving grace for us, because what it enabled us to do is really stay in contact with our various colleagues from a very, I guess, a good touch point versus, say, other platforms that we've used in the past. And so through that, we were very actively using it to have bi-weekly touch points with our team members. We used it to have a full staff meeting with all 200 plus staff we have. We utilized it to have, fun games. So we had bingo nights, or we had trivia things that we did as well. And then some of the other teams would have their own, I guess, get-togethers on the Teams platform, whether it was like a happy hour or whatever they decided to do. So I think through that, we were still feeling like we were connected. We weren't really separated. So even when we came back into the office, because we have really started to move back into the office now, it didn't feel like we hadn't seen each other. And so it was able to slide back into, our normal way of life, if we can call it that. but there wasn't a disconnect from not being, in the office with each other for that, 6-month, 4-month, 5-month period that many of us experienced. So, yeah, it was great utilizing that to just have regular communications and touch points. So, yeah.
That's so good to hear. And it's interesting to hear what that reentry looks like, because I think that many folks aren't there yet. Right? So that's interesting to see that all of that trust building and deliberate communication has paid off as you transition back to in the office work.
Yeah, I think for us, we had more meetings than at one point we were meeting overdrive, or you're like meeting exhaustion, because it felt like we were having meetings upon meetings, and then it kind of worked itself out over the time. But when we initially started in the remote working, it felt like you were on calls all the time. So we almost went into over communication versus the opposite. So that was really good for us.
Yeah. Nice.
Karin, can I add something there?
Please do. Yes.
So it's interesting, when I think of leaders communicating with their team, I think we've got to be careful. The idea of over communicating, I endorse over communicating as long as the communication is quality, whether it's a personal touch point, a check-in to see how someone's are doing to reinforce your concern for them, or whether it's a structured meeting. I think we should be communicating more, but it can't be wasted time. It can't be wasted communication. It's got to be quality communication.
Totally agree with that. We have been doing an exercise that we call 5 by 5 in 5 with 5. And David came up with this, and it works so super well. So you take your group of people who you're training, and you say, okay, in groups of 5, and you're going to have 5 minutes to come up with as many ways to communicate and pick a strategic initiative that you can come up with. The thing is, they have to be realistic. Like, you can't say, I'm going to rent an airplane and have, something trail behind it. You've got to be able to actually pull it off. And then every group goes into a breakout room, comes up with all these great ideas, and they come back and they share. And if another group has done it, you cross it off, and whoever has the most original ideas at the end wins. But the side effect of that is people thinking differently, right? Because, over communicating, I think that's the first thing that we saw a lot of people, a mistake. They just had so many team meetings, and people were having this just exhaustion from so many meetings. But if you can have this mix of asynchronous and synchronous communication going on, some that's task related, some that's relationship related, some that's creative, some change in your backdrop to have the strategic message reinforced. We even had a client put lawn sign, go and drive to all people's houses and put thank you lawn signs in their lawn, which is like cool, right? So, yeah.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, definitely that having those qualities. And Lee, when you linked your thoughts about leaders speaking from quadrant 1, I was so appreciative how quickly you wanted to utilize those grids, and that's the thing, is that what I've discovered with the mediations is that both of those conversations can exist at the same time. So the leader's conversation exists in quadrant 1, and that's a good thing. And then recognizing that the team's conversations may exist more down in quadrants 3 or 4. But the thing is, they can both live at the same time. And that I've been discovering that sometimes the conflict is because we don't know that the grids exist. And so then we think that I'm supposed to be changing your mind. We think that we should all be speaking from the same space. And I recently worked on a mediation where there was a conflict between coworkers because they had experienced a mistake in a project. And there was a huge lack of trust was a result of this. And so what we discovered in the mediation was the gentleman whose role was mostly linked with the mistake was speaking from quadrant 1 with this attempt to bring a positive tone back to the project. But the woman whose role was greatestly impacted by the mistake was speaking from quadrant 3 and 4, looking for validation of the impact.
Right.
And so in the mediation, what we were able to do is hold both of those spaces and invite one into the other quadrant, not to try to change each other's opinions, but to arrive at this mutual understanding of where you are currently living. And it was so beautiful because there was zero risk in visiting someone else's quadrant to explore and understand and ask questions. There's zero risk because your quadrant still exists. And then vice versa, we were able to have the other coworker join the other quadrant. And all of a sudden, this dawning happened where both could exist at the same time.
Wow.
And that realization built this foundation where they could then continue some really good work in trust building. And Meredith, I think back to your comment about, we're getting ready, some companies are getting ready to re-enter the workplace. And, what difference could it make if even now, while we're still on screens, if we could support building that trust so that we're ready when we get back to the workplace? That's great work.
Hey, Karin, I may be able to help you here transition. Laura, I think there's 4, maybe 6 U.S. states that could use your expertise right now.
I agree. And Lee, this is exactly what I was thinking. And again, I'm Canadian, but my goodness, I'd be living under a rock if I didn't know what was going on. Yeah. And, we care very deeply about our American neighbors, and we follow the politics the same as you do. And, I've been hearing a lot of these types of conversations, and it occurred to me that these quadrants actually could help a great deal. That what difference would that make if I went and visited you in your quadrant, not to try to change your mind, but to understand you, and that it was safe to do that because I recognize my quadrant, the existence of your quadrant doesn't negate mine. Mine still exists. And is that possible? Can I visit your quadrant and understand you and then say, hey, come on and visit mine, and I visited yours, and we're both okay?
Absolutely.
And I believe that it is possible because I see it happen over and over and over again in teams, in mediations. And I know that humans are capable of doing that.
Absolutely.
Beautiful. So I want to talk about Don Yeager's comment here quickly, and then I'm going to come back to, Lee and Meredith. Do you have any insights in terms of what do you do? How do you build trust and collaboration when people are coming from such different vantage points right now? I know that we've been doing some significant work with clients, helping them say, how do you help your managers create respectful dialogue now when people are coming at it from so many different angles. But first, Don Yeager is the COO of Mural, and I've known him for a long time, and he does a fantastic job at this. So he is coming from an expert point of view on this, which is, he's saying, reminds me of Marcus Buckingham's study on resilience, which all boils down to building trust and consistently doing weekly check-ins for 15 minutes to ask simple questions. And, it was interesting at the very beginning of this pandemic, one of the things that people were doing was canceling their one-on-ones. We were seeing, and I came on LinkedIn, I'm like, please stop canceling your one-on-ones. It's the most important thing you can be doing right now is checking in with people at a human level, helping them get clarity on what they need to do. Because when everything feels so uncertain, you need to up the clarity, need to up the connection, you need to up the curiosity. All right. And so you can do those in these 15-minute sections. So Don, we're glad you're here, and thank you for adding to the conversation. So Lee, any practical, what are you saying to your clients now as you're trying to help people prepare?
Yeah, well, again, back to the trust issue, trying to rebuild or salvage some of that trust. We've got to understand how trust is lost or broken or damaged. One of 2 things happens, right? Number one, my words and my actions are incongruent, right? I say one thing, but I do another. That will violate trust. Or number 2, my team members just don't feel like I as a leader have their back, or their fellow team members don't have their back. And so that damages trust, and there's events that happen that create that. Well, the only way to rebuild that trust is we've got to do just the opposite. We've got to make sure that our words and our actions are congruent, that what we say we mean, and that we consistently let our teammates feel like they have our support, that we have their back. Now, the key is that it takes time and consistency. This doesn't just happen immediately. It takes a whole lot less time to demolish something than it does to construct something, right? So we just got to understand, we've got to be patient and understand that consistency over time will rebuild that trust. It's not going to happen as soon as we come back together.
Oh, good. Meredith, what would you add?
Sorry, I'm so used to putting myself on mute when we're on Teams. I guess the only thing I would add to that is, you know, there always has to be two willing parties when you're building trust. So, you know, when you're trying to reestablish those relationships, you know, establishing the willingness by each party. Are you willing to, you know, work on this? And are you willing to be open? Are you willing to listen? Are you willing? Because I think it's very difficult to build trust in a relationship if one party isn't willing and the other party is. So both parties need to come together as willing parties in order to move that forward.
I really like that, Meredith. And, you know, and I think a lot of the time you need to actually say that, you know, are you willing to work on this relationship? And another thing that I often say is, do you think you can get there from here? Because if you're working with two, maybe you're working with two executives and they don't think they can solve they don't think they can solve the relationship. They don't believe it's possible. Just like in a marriage, if you don't believe you can fix it, you're not going to be able to fix it, right? And so to have that and make that invisible conversation visible and talk about it.
So good.
As we get ready to wind down here, I'm wondering if you have any quick stories or anecdotes or successes of turnarounds or teams that have done this well that you'd like to share. Anyone?
Well, I shared that one, and so I'll leave it at that and give someone else a chance. But I will say, you know, I constantly go back to that experience, and I remind myself, and I tell myself that story about those two coworkers because it was so incredible to watch and witness that each time I approach a new group that needs that support, I remember them and I keep that in mind, and I know that it's possible.
Great. Lee, do you have any specific stories that stand out to you?
Well, none of my own personally, but I am working with one manager who reached out to me, and I think this is what great leadership looks like. He said, "Lee, my team is struggling, and what can I do? I've got some ideas." And we did a Zoom call where we simply just talked about how they're doing. We talked about functioning in what I called a no huddle environment. You know, my background is college football, but when we're disconnected, when we don't get the chance to huddle up, and he really strongly suggested that I promote self-care, that our people are taking care of themselves, that they're finding ways to replicate the water cooler experience at work since we are remote. Are we finding ways to talk about the things that we share in common, sports or movies or whatever's going on? Are we able to have those casual conversations, replicate them via text, via Zoom, via chat rooms, where we can have those conversations? And thirdly, interestingly enough, journaling, because listen, I hate to be the one to say this, but this won't be the last time that something outside of our control disrupts our lives. Let's make sure that we take the lessons from this uncomfortable situation into our future so that we've got some learnings to work with to get better as we go along.
Lee, I just mapped your whole conversation onto the grid.
Really?
I absolutely did. I can't help myself.
I want to copy that grid. You brilliantly identified our resourceful past when you said this is not the last time this will happen, quadrant 3, bringing us into quadrant 4, thinking of the future when it happens again, but relying on quadrant 2, our own resiliency. Yes.
We've been here before, we've done it. What can we learn? Quadrant 2, bring it into quadrant 4 to improve, to bring us up to quadrant 1. Boom, you did it.
Oh, wow. That was really neat.
That was awesome.
So yeah, I agree. Luisa says we all need to learn from that. I am now wanting to map all the conversations going forward. And so fantastic. Meredith, any final thoughts from you?
Well, I think that was a pretty high note to end on. I don't think I can top that one. No, I think that's a great point that Laura made and Lee made. So yeah, awesome.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, I want to just thank you all for joining us. It was great to play with you again and to talk about trust and collaboration, and we'll have to connect again soon.
Sounds great. Great
to see you all. Thank you so much, Karin.
All the best.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
So we're delighted that joining us next time will be Dan Rockwell, the leadership freak. Just in time for Thanksgiving, we will be talking about how to be more grateful even when times are hard. How to be more grateful even when times are hard. Dan Rockwell. So we'll look forward to that conversation as well.